Welcome to the Loco Fit Show. I'm your host, Lauren Conlon. Each week, we bring you the best insights in nutrition, mental health, habit building, training, and more. This week, I'm interviewing Stacey Ervin Jr. to talk about how his athletic career has influenced his business, life, and mindset today. Enjoy the show. All right, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me in.
I'm super excited. And I was trying to think, before we set this up, when did we actually meet? Because obviously, when did you join with First Form? What year was that?
2017 I joined, but
No.
I feel like probably not until 2018 or 19.
It was after you had won the Athlete Search. When was that?
Oh man,
Right?
Athlete Search. Yeah, Athlete Search was 2020.
Okay, so then maybe it was. I was thinking,
Yeah,
that came to
2020.
mind was Arizona.
Yeah.
But when was that? Because every time...
2021.
Fuck.
Yeah.
Was it?
Yeah. But yeah, I guess the first time we actually met was in Arizona.
Yeah.
On Camelback Mountain.
Yeah.
Dope trip.
Oh my god, that was
Dope trip.
so random. They were like,
Yeah.
hey, so this was last year.
Yep.
I was like, was that a year ago, 2 years? Was that 6 years ago? At
Right.
this point, I can't fucking keep up.
Right.
But basically, last minute, they were like, hey, we're going to go to Phoenix. If you guys have ever been there, there's an area called Scottsdale. It's the best place to visit in Phoenix for sure. And we went on Camelback Mountain, which is not really a mountain. It's more like a rock scale scramble, for being honest. And they were like, hey, we're just going to stay at a hotel for 2 days and then have a little hiking meetup, I guess, kind of thing.
Yeah, with
and it was a few hundred people showed up.
Yeah, it was really cool. I mean, I was surprised at the turnout too.
Yeah.
We had, like you said, a few hundred people climbing Camelback Mountain together. So a bunch of different paces, as you can imagine.
Yeah, oh my
climbing
God,
the mountain.
Trotter, literally.
Yeah. I was like, bro, you made it though. You made it. That's all that matters.
No, I was rooming with Steph. So Steph Lawler, who was on the podcast before, one of the other elite trainers, Mike Trotter, they were going down on the descent together, and I was already back in the room, showered. I'm like, yo, Steph, where are you at? Are you did you guys go and get food or something?
I had no idea.
She literally was like, we're still walking down, and I could hear him in the back. And she's like, he's really struggling. I was like, I have been back and showered and taken care of.
I've been chilling. Honestly, I feel like the way down was a little bit.
It was sketch.
It was a little sketch because it got steep at some points, and then the rocks were a little loose.
Oh my god!
But then who was I with? Somebody had decided that we need to race. So we were kind of
wow, that doesn't sound like anybody at First Form.
Not at all,
way.
right? So we're freaking trucking down the mountain. I'm freaking mountain goating it, hopping on rocks. And I'm like, okay, I hope that this doesn't decide to misplace itself on this jump. But we made it back, But that was certainly an interesting trip. That was dope, though.
Yeah, it was really fun. But yeah, I think that's really the first time that we hung out. And when did you win the Athlete Search? In 2020?
Yeah, I want to say they announced.
It was you and Tony.
Me and Tony as the winners of the Athlete Search in January of 2021.
Yeah. Okay, so that was okay, that's what I thought.
Yep.
I was it's all coming back now. There we go. I wasn't too far
Wow,
off.
a lot has happened in that year. That's pretty crazy.
That was a year ago.
Yeah, and then all this time frame, you know how this is? This whole time frame is just exactly. It just melds together. Even the days of the week, I'm is it freaking Tuesday? What is it? It's freaking Sunday. I'm oh yeah.
Yeah, pretty much at this point, I know what day it is based on client check-ins. I know when I see so-and-so's email. So if they send it on the wrong day, I'm what fucking day is it?
Right.
You totally fucked up my calendar.
This is not the time we're supposed to be checking in right now.
Well, speaking of being competitive and of course, doing First Form things, but let's back up and go through your just kind of competitive history because you have a very long history being an athlete and being a pretty good athlete. I guess we'll say it that way.
Yeah, it's fun.
You're all right.
Some athletic
mediocre
stuff. Yeah, some cool things that I've done. No, I was a competitive gymnast for 18 years. I started it when I was 6 years old. Self-taught myself a back handspring in kindergarten. Everyone always asks, how'd you get into gymnastics? Because it's really not something that is common, especially for young boys in particularly this country to go that route. But I saw a friend of mine in kindergarten do a back handspring, and I was like, yo, that's awesome. How did you do that? And then I'm a very visual learner, so even at that stage of my life, I was watching how he was doing it, and I was all right, I think I could do that. And then to the best of my memory, I was just all right, let's see what's up. And did a couple, I was like, oh, I can do this for real. And so I just started doing back handsprings everywhere. Progressed that to like a back tuck, so doing it without my hands, like off elevated surfaces. And my mom was like, yo, this is not safe. Like, you're gonna hurt yourself if we don't get you into some type of program. So like, went to a recreational program, and they were like, he's got to go somewhere that has team gymnastics. So once I got to Michigan Academy of Gymnastics, that's where I started really competitively. Kind of just took off from there. Had a passion for tumbling more so, and then developed a passion for men's artistic gymnastics, and competed for Team USA both as a junior, made the senior national team in 2013, and then was competing for University of Michigan from 2011 to 2015, and that was just an awesome experience.
So when you work at, like, I feel like I always hear about like gymnastics and dance and all that kind of stuff. Like, I actually did that, surprisingly, for a year. I think they probably were like, she shouldn't come back. But so
side note, writing on the progress report.
They were like, just stop going. We're not even gonna take your money.
Right.
I was that uncoordinated, but I did a little bit of dance and then gymnastics, kind of like I feel like every like young girl does, right? And then I found horse riding and I was like, oh, I like this.
Yeah.
But
that's dope.
That was.
I don't know anybody else who's
really
done horseback riding. Yeah.
Oh yeah, that was my like competitive show, like riding from 7 to like 20.
Whoa.
Yeah.
What's the biggest challenge in that? I know there's a lot. But like,
yeah.
What was like your biggest hurdle to overcome?
I would say because it's pretty rough.
Yeah.
Like, riding is a rough sport.
Right.
Like, you get thrown and drugged and kicked, and I mean, like, it's very violent.
Wow.
And when you have, like, when you're younger and that happens, it's kind of like, you know, I'm sure same thing for you.
Yeah.
Like, right, when you're younger, you kind of like don't care. You're taking a big jump or whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
And you're just like, fuck it. But once you've had a few bad experiences, right, then that gets in your head as you get older. And I had some pretty gnarly injuries. Like, my freshman year of high school, I broke both my wrists at the same time. So my horse bucked me off, and then I landed. I flew over him, and I landed like just obviously wrong.
Right.
And I blacked out obviously, and then I opened my eyes, and both my wrists were like all curled up, and I was like, well, this doesn't seem right. You know what I mean? This is not good. That's literally what I look like. So of course, freshman year, I have 2 red casts. Like, I couldn't fucking look any worse.
Right.
But
you decided to go with red casts.
Yeah,
that was the most not obvious.
Yeah, it was so fun.
I'm just gonna go with.
It was such a bad time. Yeah, and then they had to like re-break while I was like awake. And,
right.
You know, it was just
having to reset it and stuff.
Yeah.
Oh, you broke them good then.
Oh yeah.
Oh,
I had to have it like fixed.
Yeah.
But so I would say that was one of the challenges as I got older, was like, the more you just get like banged up, the more you kind of like overthink it, and it's like a running theme in my life. But you start to overthink those situations, and what I used to do was like hunter jumper and like equitation, so it was like a lot of like pattern based stuff. So you have to like memorize a pattern like right away. There'd be 15 jumps, and then you know your trainer would say, okay, hey, here's this and this. You have to memorize it right away and go out and execute it. So like that was also like, it was just a very different type of like learning and memory and stuff. So like all the other shit was like easy, like taking care of horses like is a huge responsibility, but I always enjoyed that. Like I enjoyed like the kind of like labor side of stuff and like whatever, but definitely I would say not overthinking things after you had a few bad falls, which I'm sure you probably had as well.
Can relate to that. 100%. One of the biggest things, I feel like, you know, as an athlete in sport, we get to test those, I guess we'll call them life principles. You know, people in the self-development space will be like, these are the principles of success. You got to fail to succeed, which is true, but it's true in life, right? And like, I feel like as an athlete, regardless of the sport, like you get the opportunity to like experience those principles firsthand in more of like an arena, like in the arena of sport, and then you can apply that to your life later on, but you have to learn that lesson the hard way, really. And in gymnastics, much like in horseback riding, I imagine, unless you're injured, right, and you can't physically get back up and do it again, like the quickest cure for that fear is to just get back up and do it. Whatever you're trying to do, get back up and do it immediately. Otherwise, you'll sit on the idea of what happened and you'll tell yourself that story, and then you're just like, you're frozen in that fear to the point where you're like, I don't want to do it. So that fear just creates like inaction. But I certainly have moments in gymnastics where I've fallen off or done something incorrectly, and then I look at my coach and he's like, all right, well, you gotta get back up and do it again. And I'm like, when I'm younger, I'm like crying. I'm like, I don't want to do it. I don't want to go again. I just want to quit. And he's like, get back up, do it again. And then you do it, and then you realize it's like, oh, I fucked up. Mm-hmm. Okay, it wasn't the skill necessarily. It wasn't, I did something that, I knew I shouldn't, or I just didn't quite understand the mechanics of it. And then you get back up, and then once you complete it, or, you do it, but you don't get hurt, you're like, oh, okay. And that conquering that fear is just like huge.
Oh my gosh. As soon as we would fall off or something would happen, of course, if you're not injured, right, mm-hmm. you have to get back on. You have to do what you were trying to accomplish, whether it was a certain jump or a certain move or whatever it was, have to do that right away. Because if you, like you said, if you just sit on it, you're going to work that up. And as kids, like no matter how reflective and introspective you are as a kid, mm-hmm. you don't have nearly as much as you do as an adult. Right?
Yeah, no doubt.
I never sat around and pondered the existence of life and what this all means when I was 9, right? So, I mean, some kids I'm sure do, but I wasn't.
Right.
So for me, it was easy. But now it is so interesting, like when you think about as an adult, it's just so much harder to do that, right?
Yeah.
Like one bad thing happens and we're like crushed by it.
Right, right.
Like, fuck, like it's so silly when you think about it. But it was really cool that like our coaches knew that, mm-hmm. right? And like our trainers knew that early on. And it was kind of like what we were talking about earlier with like the NSDR mm-hmm. protocols, right? Like non-sleep deep rest, and how if you actually will have some of these like, not necessarily sleep, but even just like kind of like a resting protocol mm-hmm. after you learn something, you'll actually be able to retain that information and process it better.
Right.
But some people kind of intuitively have just found that, like whether it's like a coach or another trainer, mm-hmm. and maybe they didn't know the science behind it, but they were like, hey, like take a nap after you train or do this.
This works.
And this works, but like now we know why. So the same thing, like I didn't really think about that when I was younger, like, oh, gotta get up, gotta do that again.
Right.
But that really translates so much to life and like as we're older, because like literally 1 or 2 bad things happen and we're just like, oh, can't do it.
Big time.
Gonna give up on this.
Yeah, and especially like I feel like when you're a kid, time passes like so much differently. Like, you people ask me all the time about like wanting to do the skill. Like I'll post something on Instagram or social media, whatever. Someone sees me do something that stems from my gymnastics background. They're like, oh man, I want to learn that. And I'm like, you actually don't. You think you do. You think you want to learn how to do this, but really you want the outcome. You don't want the learning process that it entails. And it's like, as a kid, that time just is going to pass. Like, I mean, the time's going to pass regardless, but like as a kid, I feel like that time passes so much easier and quicker in our minds, and because we're not in that cognitive mode like we are as adults. No. So like,
and we're so neuroplastic.
Yeah.
I mean, the neuroplasticity up to age 25 is just so much more.
Right.
And the younger you are and the earlier you can do something like that, obviously the easier it is to pick up. And that's why usually people who are successful in really technical things like gymnastics start when they're young. You know, you don't ever hear of somebody in the Olympics who was like, oh, I was 15 and picked this up. Like legitimately, I don't think anybody.
Right.
I don't know for sure, but I would bet a lot of money that it's like 0.
Right. And the thing is too, right? Like when you're a kid and you're in that mode, like failures or like injuries don't really seem as like daunting, because you're just like, whatever, I'm gonna get over it. Yeah. But then as an adult, you like have the injury and maybe the same thing that you would have experienced when you were younger, but now your mind is resting on the failure of it so much more than it is what comes beyond it. And like as a kid, you're thinking way beyond that moment in time. You're just like, oh yeah, okay, I got hurt, whatever, I'll just get back to practice in a couple weeks, whatever. And as an adult, you're like, I don't know if I ever want to go back.
Yeah.
I don't know if I ever want to try that again. And it's like, well, okay, well, you will never know your capacity if you don't go back. And also, you haven't lost until you quit, you know what I mean? So it's like, I think that having that background in sport is just massive for mentality. Obviously, the physical component of sport in youth is like incredible, but like I think the mental tricks that you pick up and just like the principles that you can come to understand through practice is invaluable.
I don't know who I would be as a person if I didn't have all those experiences.
Yeah, same.
Like it's weird to think about like, not even like, let's not even think about high school, but like early, how we were talking about like, you were doing gymnastics, I was at the barn, like I had all of these responsibilities. Like we had, you had practice, like there's so much like structure there and so many different things. And I think about, like kids now, and you're like, what are you doing? You know what I mean? Or especially even like right now, the past 2 years, like not doing their normal socializing, like staying at home, like being on the screens and stuff. Like I didn't have any of that. Like nor did I probably would have wanted it either.
Right.
Even once that became like of access in like high school, I was like, I don't want this. Like somebody else do this.
It's not what I'm interested in.
No. And like, but to think about how much that influenced us as like, adults is just, you can't even, like we would be totally different people.
Totally different. Entirely
different.
I mean, you think about how much a single decision can change you. When we talk about, the structure of routine that you like lived your life within for so long, like it's incredible. Like even like what amazes me is like the fact that I've had a coach in athletic capacity for so many years of my life that it just seems to me that that was just like everybody experiences what it's like to have a coach. Everyone knows at some point, no, that's not the case. And like now coaching people who are same age as me, maybe older than me, and have never had that, it's such a deep moment when they're like, I've never had someone who has, believed in me or taken the time to like express their support for me. And it blows my mind. Like those are the really humbling moments where I'm grateful for the impact that I can have on someone else's life, not just in their fitness journey, but in their actual life, because I'm like, man, we could talk about success principles, or you could talk to somebody about a particular mindset, but if they don't have a baseline level of belief in themselves, like those principles are going to fall on deaf ears because they're thinking, well, that's for someone else, that's not for me. But it is for them. They just haven't heard it enough to understand that like this is also for me. And so like that is something that I had taken, I guess, for granted for a long time. And now I'm really grateful for it. And I'm really appreciative of having a coach or, supportive family, supportive friends. Because it's like so many people go through life having to fight all of that because even if they do have a coach, maybe they're not like a supportive one, or maybe their family members don't necessarily like show them that belief or give them that support. And so it's like they're really having to like plant that seed and water it entirely on their own. So people who do that, big kudos to them for fighting in that way. And I think that their resiliency is stronger than others who have just been given that type of support too.
Oh, for sure. It's just, it's so different, right? And it's so nice to now like full circle, you can come back and say, hey, like I had all these great coaches and mentors, and like now I can be that person for someone else. But yeah, it is so crazy to think like, what would it be like if we hadn't have had that? Like I like you said, in every capacity, I've had like a coach or a trainer, or I mean, even like, I used to play piano. Like I had a piano instructor who like was supportive in that way. It's just like small things along the way where like some people just don't have that at all. And it's so sad.
Yeah,
it really is. Like, and then people are like, thank you, so much for believing in me, and you hear about their life, because obviously like what we do is very personal, and like people tell us. I mean, people tell me, people be telling me everything, which is good.
Right.
And I want that relationship with clients because all of that influences it. Like when I first started coaching,
those biopsychosocial factors that you have to account for in every aspect. So you're like, okay, maybe it wasn't this as my initial thinking had led me to. This now makes more sense. But you don't know what they don't tell you, what I'm saying?
And when you first start, I think as a coach, you're like, okay, I'm going to focus on this one piece. But it's like, no, it really is an all-encompassing. And I might not be an expert in all of those areas, but I can at least support you in the best way, listen, try to come up with some solutions. And I think that, one thing as coaches and people kind of in this industry, we can forget, and this is a huge thing that I try to like always detach from, is like, okay, my experiences do not map onto other people's.
Yes.
Right? Like my background in food or training or mindset is not going to be the same as my clients. So while I can pull from that, like I can pull from my experiences, what have I learned like throughout my life, and like what did I learn when I had an eating disorder and when I competed and when I did all this. I can use that for my clients, but I can't say, oh, I'm going to put this lens over everything,
right?
Because that's taking away their background, right? Like maybe they didn't have, like I started dieting at a very young age. So I became hyper aware of food. Like I've been aware of like what's in food for most of my life.
Right.
Not everybody's like that, right?
Not
so if
everybody knows what. Some people have never even looked at a nutrition label,
yeah,
which still shocks me to this day. I'm like, bro,
How
everybody's got to eat. You gotta know, like you gotta know some
shit's everywhere.
Right, it's everywhere. Some
you had to somehow flip it over and go, what is this thing?
Right.
But
numbers, gross.
I hate numbers. But some people, right, like we can't say, oh, we have all this information, so I expect my clients to know this.
Right.
I can't expect them to know that, or I can't expect that this one thing caused, X caused Y for me. It might cause a different situation for that client. So I think that, we can, like, pulling from experiences is amazing as a coach and a mentor and whatever, but you also have to recognize, okay, this does not mean that that's their background.
Right.
And we really have, like, when working with a wide range of people, like, obviously you might work with people who have a similar background as you, but the chances are you're probably not.
Exactly.
Right? Because they might not be seeking out a coach in that capacity than if they had your same background, right? Like they might, but they also might not.
Exactly right.
Okay, so you did this competitively in college, which is awesome. How was that like just being in college and being a high-level collegiate athlete?
I used to think that students that weren't student athletes had it easier because they were able to just focus on just school. And now I'm like totally of the opposite mindset where I'm like, although it's more challenging, like the demands of like the physical components of it, man, I'm like super grateful for the ability to be a student athlete and take that competition and drive outside of just gymnastics into academics. But it was an amazing experience. Being a student athlete is super challenging, but again, we're able to maintain that discipline and have that structure, that routine, having a coach. If I had decided to just go to school without sport, well then, as soon as my motivation wanes academically, maybe I'm like one who's like, you know what, maybe the school thing ain't for me. But like, if there were times where my academic motivation did wane, however, with the discipline of sport, I'm not really able to just say like, I'm gonna just hang it up academically.
And
like,
you can't.
Because there's more accountability, with the coaches, with the team, and yourself. And so like that was a really cool experience. But like strictly from the athletic side, it was awesome to be a part of such a large athletic community. The University of Michigan is where I went. I'm not sure if I had said that yet, but there's just a lot of resources for the athletic department there, and so having like top-notch sports therapists, like you could have sports psych. We had a nutritionist. We had, and these are all resources that are available, but not necessarily like given to you. Like you have to seek them out, right? So like the first couple of years, I wasn't even like using the full capacity of everything, but then like I
can eat whatever I want.
Yeah. I really was like, honestly,
of course you were.
Yeah, the way I really got into like the fitness side of things and like nutrition was like I was at a competition out in California. I think it was spring break of like my freshman or sophomore year. Had to be my freshman or sophomore year. I don't remember which one of the two. It was my freshman year. And I had ordered dinner, and we were just like chilling at the hotel, me and my teammates, and I ordered this tray of lasagna. And some people, yeah, exactly. I don't even be eating lasagna anymore. I'm like on this gluten-free kick right now. So like I ordered this tray of lasagna, and I say tray, it was like a personal thing, you know what I mean? But like it's easily could have been like 4 meals, now with what I know. If I knew what I know now. And it's the day before a competition. Scratch that, it's the night before a competition. And so like our coach walks in and like he's not trying to be a dick or anything. He's just like, maybe he was trying to be a dick, I don't know. He's cool. But anyway, he was like, do you understand what you're like eating right now? And I'm like, yeah, lasagna, bro.
You want some?
It's delicious. Like, come on. And he's like, no, he's like, you need to understand like how much food you're actually eating. And like that small instance wasn't like a eureka moment for me where I was like, oh my God, yeah, I need to study nutrition now. It was like a seed, where I was like, okay, I should probably figure this out. I did enjoy the rest of that tray of lasagna for sure, let's be honest here. But I took that moment, and once, like sometimes things will just like resurface, right? Like that seed finally sprouted in my mind, and I was like, I should fine tune my nutrition a little bit more. And so like that's how I really started to get engaged in like learning how to track macros, what that even means. Like, what do these macronutrients do for a body? How do they supply you with energy? What is the purpose, this, that, or the other? And so I got really interested in it. And that's how I got into that path, and it really helped my performance as an athlete. Not that I was on top of it all the time, but like, at least I had some semblance of understanding it, right? Because everybody's got to eat. Everybody should have some baseline knowledge of that. So that's really how I got into that side of things. But
it's
again, having
really
a coach.
Nuts how, so, obviously genetics and talent and all that are really important, right? Like you're kind of what you're going into, mm-hmm. like with it is number one. Mm-hmm. So you can see people who are at the top, like peak, right? Like mm-hmm. let's take collegiate sports, for example, mm-hmm. and they come in and they have, great work ethic, great genetics, like all that. They eat like fucking trash. Yeah. Like, because a lot of people, like, you're graduating high school. You're not really
by yourself.
You're not thinking about all this, right. But like you're succeeding despite what you're doing, right? Like, because you can get by. But all I can think is like, oh my gosh, imagine if you just put like 10% effort in. Oh my gosh. How much better you would be. And that's not just collegiate. That also is professional sports as well. Right. And it's just so, the resources are there, but to your point, like you have to actually seek them out. And so when I went to Florida State for my undergrad, which similar has like a ton of resources mm-hmm. for athletics. It's a huge school for mm-hmm. like so many different high level teams. And my roommate was on the track team. And so there would be times where I was able to go with her like into like the, the sports area and whatever and like check everything out. And at that time I was a dietetics major. So I was of course like nerding out of everything. And they have, the facilities are just incredible for like the training and like the recovery and like the food, like all of that.
Top notch stuff.
Oh my God. But you're still choosing. Nobody's saying, hey, you have to eat this or you can't have that, exactly. Because of course it's like free will in your decision. But all I could think was like, man, if people just cared like a little bit more about what they ate. And not even to say like for a physique perspective, this is purely performance. Like people forget like what we talk obviously a lot of the podcasts about like health and physique, mm-hmm. which are, kind of our main focus, but mm-hmm. performance has a huge component when it comes to food. Yeah. And not only just performance for your session or your match or your meet or whatever, but your recovery for subsequent training. Mm-hmm. And the fact that that's just like totally overlooked is just mind blowing to me. Yeah. And like you can get away with it when you're younger. You just can't, right? Yeah. But then as you get older, maybe not so much. Right. And then my dad was in the NFL, so he, played in college, obviously played in the NFL, whatever, has a lot of friends. And thankfully he's taking care of himself, right? Like, my mom, like they cook and they eat really healthy, he's super active, all that. But as an offensive lineman, I know a lot of his friends who are also offensive linemen who, they clearly, there's a huge push to like eat a lot, gain weight, whatever, there's like weight. And for good reason, right? And there's literally like weight caps at, different teams and whatever, like positions. But if you continue your life, and obviously there's a huge, part, like work hard, play hard aspect in that, all that. And if you are used to that and you're used to your, 20 to 30-year-old body metabolism training practice, but now you're no longer doing that. You're super banged up. You can barely train, or you don't even want to train. Right. You're still drinking and partying like you used to. You have terrible eating habits. Like these people are fucked up. Yeah. And it's like, oh my gosh, if we had
from
just
the inside out.
Oh yeah.
From the inside out.
So bad. And again, that's a different time era, I feel like things are getting better. But it's like, man, if we just had like a 10% better for like education on this, mm-hmm.
It would just be. And I've had to give the adults in my life grace on that, and myself too, because it's like you can't give what you don't have, mm-hmm. and most people have never been pushed to learn more about nutrition or food in general, or understand like the basics of nutrition. Basics. I'm talking easy stuff, like even just understanding what it means to have a higher calorie food versus a lower calorie food. Like some people don't even have that understanding, and so like they can't tell you what they don't know. And I used to be like, man, why didn't no one ever tell me this? And then I'm like, well, that's because no one ever told them that. And so I'm like, really it came down to that personal responsibility of like, okay, well, if you feel you need to know it, you need to start to learn it. And that's just been huge. And I try to tell, because we're talking about how you're forming these dietary habits and you're eating, some people may not be eating the best foods or whatever. And not to demonize it, because you can enjoy everything in moderation. However, like I always stress for my clients, like food is fuel. Like understand what you're eating so you know how you're fueling your body. Obviously at that macro level, but like understand that like it's a cellular process. Like that food's being broken down to nourish your body. So like understand that when you're making these decisions. And I know that the change period is very tough. It's very challenging. It can be longer for some than others. However, like understand that when you're trying to make new decisions, think about it on that scale of like, whoa, I'm not going to see a change immediately, but like this will certainly have an impact, a deep impact from the inside out. And like even just that small paradigm shift has been like really impactful for some of my most successful clients, and even some of the clients who at first are not really doing very well, and then they're finally like, oh, that's what he means by saying that. Okay, now I get it. And like those lifestyle changes, those small changes in the disciplines of how you approach food or how you approach movement or just how you're approaching, you know, the mindset that you carry into your life, your attitude, like it's huge. It's huge.
Oh, mindset influences our physiology so much. There's this amazing researcher, her name is Aaliyah Crum. She's out of Stanford, and she literally runs, like, all of her research is around this, like how mindset influences everything from exercise to physiology. And so she has this really famous study. Everybody always asks her about it, but it's like the milkshake study, whatever. Mm-hmm. So basically, they brought in two groups, and they tested the same people with both the shakes, right? So they said, hey, this one shake is a really indulgent, high calorie, high fat shake, and this other shake is like a sensible, low calorie, low option. Mm-hmm. And both people had it like a week apart. Mm-hmm. And they measured the ghrelin output, which is the hunger hormone that's secreted from our stomach, that says like, hey, like I'm hungry. And there were like significant differences when you just told somebody that this was a sensible, healthy option. They had more ghrelin output. Like their body told them to be hungry sooner because it wasn't an indulgent thing. Right. Whereas with the indulgent one, they were like, oh yeah, it was so indulgent. Like I'm full. Right. How fucking, it was That's the same, crazy. It was the same calories.
Yeah, it's the same
thing.
They
had said, they were like, oh, this one's, 100.
It was the same person. Same person,
same shake, a week apart.
Whoa.
They had said the indulgent was like 600 calories and then the sensible was like 150. Right. It was actually like 300.
Right.
Like both times they had same exact fucking shake.
Wow.
And literally down, like, because you told yourself this, and she did another paper, this totally blew my mind. Yeah. Public speaking is obviously like a huge issue for most people. That's like a very anxiety provoking thing, right? So she does a lot of work in like what is known as like stress, like they talk about stress is enhancing versus stress is debilitating, so like all about stress perception work. And they were doing a study where you had to present something and the crowd was giving like positive feedback, like nods, smiles, like like recognition. Mm-hmm. And they had a normal secretion of both cortisol and DHEA sulfate, which is like the anabolic compound that like offsets the catabolic process of cortisol. Yeah. But when they had the negative, like they were like looked like they didn't like it, or they were like confused, or like rolling their eyes.
Why are you on stage talking?
Yeah, why are you talking about this? They had just a cortisol secretion and not a DHEA release.
Wow.
Now, that was an acute study, right? But think about the effects of how many times that kind of stuff happens, and how if we go into situations with this stress is debilitating mindset all the time, like how that's going to influence us down to a physiological, like cellular level. Right. It is so crazy.
Like how we were talking earlier about not having a support system that is like believing in you and encouraging you. I can imagine that same process is occurring for that person in their day-to-day life, and they're just getting this cortisol response and not really getting that ability to like have their body in that homeostasis and like counteracting the effects of that. And that's wild. And I'll get a little existential because I understand, like,
because that's who we are.
Yeah, because that's just where that's just where the mind rests, but like I can, it's surprising, but I can understand how that would happen, especially with just like giving someone that idea, right? It's like Inception, you know what I mean? Like, such a good movie. But like, I firmly believe, like the body is a reflection of the subconscious mind, meaning what? Like subconsciously you're running your habits, your programs, your routines, this, that, and the other. You have things that just like occur for you. But even down on like a cellular level, like your body is a reflection of that subconscious mind. So it takes a lot of change for that to occur, because you have to, the only way you condition your subconscious mind is through repetition. So you have to hear it, you have to hear it again, you have to practice it until you like start to believe it, then changes can occur. So it's like, once you tell someone, especially if you're running a study, you know, and then the person operating the study is telling you something, you know, you might not need that repetition as much to accept that as fact. So like you're just instantly in that mode of like, yeah, that's right. And so like your body's already like, this is how I'm going to feel about this. This is how I'm going to feel about this one. This is how I'll process this versus how I'll process this. So it's like crazy to see it quantified, but certainly something believable for me, because I'm always trying to like drop things into my subconscious, you know what I'm saying? I'm like, all right, we're going to make it happen. That's how it's going to work.
What's the law of attraction?
Exactly,
you're just
right.
making everything happen.
We manifested, baby. We're out here working.
Just talking in the mirror all the
Literally, though. Don't knock it. Don't knock it.
why are you in the bathroom for so long?
Right.
I was just,
don't worry, I was just talking to somebody. Just
like
manifested.
It's my shadow. I'm just talking to the shadow.
We're good.
But okay, so you competed through college, and then were you done afterwards? Like, I don't really know how gymnastics works, so excuse me, but
no, you're good.
Like, is there anything?
I don't know how gymnastics works.
Like, is there anything after? I mean, obviously, I guess like the Olympics, but like. There's not really like a casual, like you're not like, I'm a hobbyist gymnast.
Exactly.
Like, there's not really anything.
Yeah, like you can, but like if you do,
really?
I mean, you can, but like if you're doing it as a hobby, you're probably going to be better off spending that time elsewhere if you're not going to be trying to pursue it like professionally. So like after college, I graduated in 2015, eligibility obviously up same time. I did a couple of competitions. I did 3 competitions as a professional. I did one I did more than that, because I did summer U.S. nationals as an individual as well. So I did about 4 competitions as a professional in the gymnastics circuit. So
that is a thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
So there's it's just the opportunities are few and far between, right? So like the competitions are maybe like twice a year, maybe 3 times. If you need to go to a qualifier, you have like 3 domestic opportunities to compete on like a bigger stage. You can go to invitationals, but it's not really like something that you would make a extremely successful career out of. But
and you would just do that for a few years after, right? Like it's not like you wouldn't probably do that now.
Right, no, and especially like jumping back into the sport from the amount of time I've been out of it.
Yeah.
Insane. Stuff that people do now, insane. If you guys Google gymnastics 2020, 2021, people are doing ridiculous stuff. I'm just like, all right, good. I bowed out at the right time. But I competed about 4 times after, did a couple domestic competitions, and then the last competition I competed at was actually in France. It was super dope. Went over there just for like a little pro circuit competition. It was like the top 12 of France.
And to have fun.
Yeah, and had fun. Yeah, exactly. I remember distinctly, like, I stuck my last vault that I ever competed, and that was just like a really highlight moment for me, because it was like the vault is a blind landing, so it's like a handspring, so over the vault table, which is shaped like a tongue. You go from the springboard to your hands, take off from your hands. It's essentially 2.5 front flips, and then like you're landing still facing forward, right? So like the landing just kind of happens, right? And I stuck it, and I was like, let's go, getting mad hype. I'm like, ah! All the people in France are like,
oh my god,
what the hell is this guy?
Crazy American.
This guy is going off right now.
Look at Sweet Cream.
Yeah, Sweet Cream. That was my name in college. So I told the Starbucks barista. I think she believed me.
She was like, okay.
She's like, here, sir, take your coffee and get out, please. Yeah, no problem.
But like that was probably really cool, because you knew going into that was going to be your last one.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So then you like, damn, like I did this, like I went out how I wanted to.
Yep.
You know what I mean? It wasn't.
The pressure was off. I was just like, I'm going to go have fun. We're going to make sure that like this is a good competition. I thought maybe I'll do a competition after this, but I was pretty sold on the fact that I was done. The only other route that I would have taken would have been like going to the Olympic Training Center, which would have had me move from Michigan to Colorado. And I was just like, I'm not sure that that's my path anymore. I really just stopped really putting that.
Yeah. What made you decide that you wanted to be done, or like what was?
I'm not sure. I think there's like multiple factors. that played into it, but when it comes down to it, I feel like I no longer saw the value in pushing forth for that journey, because I to be honest, I was like, I don't think that I'm going to make this Olympic team. That was like around 2016, and I was like, am I really going to do this for another 4 years for an opportunity to make an Olympic team? And then what am I going to do after that, you know? And then like the usual path is like, even for the Olympians, like you go to the Olympics, and granted everybody, you know, make your own way. I'm a believer in it, whatever, but the usual path is like, go to the Olympics, whatever. You either are successful there or not, however that shakes down for you, and then you coach gymnastics for eternity. And I was like, I don't really see that for me. Like, I don't want to do that. And I have coached gymnastics before. It's super fun. I enjoy it. I might do some stuff with it later on, but I just didn't see that for me now. Like, there was too much life for me to live in that meantime. And like, I know for a fact, like, this past quadrennium, so like the Olympics every 4 years, you know, there's a new quadrennium each time. And in this past quadrennium, I had a lot of friends who finally hung their grips up and retired. And seeing that was like pretty surreal for me, because I'm like, damn, I don't know how much I would, like, all the growth that I've experienced over the past, you know, 5 years from leaving the sport. I don't know if I would have ever tried to approach my life in that way. So I don't regret the decision one bit, because I'm like, man, I've learned so much and built so many awesome relationships and new connections, and even within my own mind, like understanding things at a deeper level. And I'm like, sheesh, I think I stepped out at the exact right time, because I had a lot of growing up to do, to be entirely honest. Because the sport keeps you, you know, you have, this is your community, whatever, like this is the world that you know. And so like I had to get out of that. Not that I was sheltered or anything, but like I needed to experience more. And so that growth period has been amazing. And so as similarly as we said earlier, like I don't know who I would end up being had I stayed in the sport.
Yeah, it's funny how it's like such a dichotomy, right? Because that structure shaped you, but then also that was why you needed to leave, right? Because it was like, this isn't me anymore, and I don't want this. Like you said, you have to think about, where is this going to put me in the next few years? Right. And I think a lot of people look at that as like a really negative thing, and I'm like, it's not negative. It's just it's 100% realistic. Right. And that's same thing when I stopped taking a break, extended break from competing, right? And I did that for so many years. I did my first show in 2011, and then I did my last one in 2018, and I've done like 22 or 23 shows. Right?
Wow.
Did a lot.
Yeah.
And did a lot of great things. Did figure, then eventually went to bikini, then turned pro, then did that, traveled everywhere. Like, it was such a great part of my life. And I learned and became who I am now because of that. But I knew, I was like, there's something, I didn't have like a really like I didn't walk off stage and was like, this is it. But I just knew, like, at the end of that prep, I was like, this is it for a while, for like, from the prep perspective. So I don't really feel like I'm maybe done forever, but like I'm done in that way. You know, when I first started, like it's like, okay, you get your pro card, you want to be as competitive as you can. And then it's also like, hey, I got to be realistic. Like, to be a competitive pro, I have to do all of these things.
Yes.
Do I want to do those things?
Yes.
No.
Yes.
Do I want to compete again, maybe to have a challenge, and to have, now it would be like we all compete like as a team. Like we have a bunch of people on the team, like pros and amateurs. We all do it together. Like that would be fun.
That's fun. That
would be super fun. But I'm never going to go up there again with that intention of like, I'm trying to win the Olympia.
Yeah, as an individual, it's much
like,
more challenging too.
That's okay. You know, it's not that I'm like, oh, I could never make it. Like, just believe in yourself. It's like, first of all, especially when we're talking about bodybuilding, like this is like very aesthetically, genetically based, right? I do not have the look of what they're going for, which is totally fine. I love my body. It's just not that look, right? Like, and to get there, to like maybe even scrape by to hopefully get there, it would take everything. And then I wouldn't have my business and all the experiences that I have and the ability to do what I do now and what I enjoy. So I think that it's important, like when people are facing these kind of crossroads, because it really is a big thing. Like, I don't know how you felt, but like there's such an identity behind it.
Oh, 100%.
Like, you're like,
that for a while.
I'm Stacey, the gymnast, right? And everybody knows you as a gymnast because you were doing that for
to some degree. I feel like I still probably struggle with breaking away from that. I'm like, I do so much more than this, y'all. Okay, I can flip. It's cool. I know. It's cool. I get it. But I do so much more. Right. I'm more than my flips. I'm more than my flips.
But like, on the surface level, people see that, they're like, oh, that's cool. Like, how the fuck do you do that? Oh, you're a gymnast. Oh my, like, they want to learn about that, but you're like, no, I am more than this. So I think, at least, for me, and I think for any probably athlete listening, like, that is a really, really hard shift. Like, that identity loss. I even felt that as a student. Like, when I finished my master's, and I knew it was really like an ego thing why I wanted a PhD. Like, in the back of my mind, I was like, this is just because I think I need it. And I just know a disproportionate amount of people who have PhDs. Like, just the people that I've been surrounded with, like, I'm like, everybody has a PhD.
Right.
People are like, no. And in my mind, that was a yes, right? Because the people that I had been surrounded with for the past several years all had PhDs. So it was like, I got to get a PhD. And as I was finishing my master's, I was like, I do not want to do this right now. Like, I have zero interest in this. Like, the only thing that's pulling me is like that ego of like, you have to get it. You have to get it. Like, you're nothing unless you have a PhD. Like, everybody's going to look at you as you have your MS. Like, oh, right.
Everyone's going to look at you like, you didn't got your PhD.
Like, that's literally how I thought. And then, like, losing that like student identity was so hard, especially because I'm somebody who like loves to learn and like loves to challenge myself, and I had that structure for so long. Like, you're forced to learn things when you're in school,
100%.
Like, you have to. So it was a big transition. Like, all right, I still have to carve out that. Like, I still have this desire to learn, but I have to now carve this time out in my life, and how I learn might also look different than like it used to, right? Like, learning to me used to be like, hey, I'm gonna like study this and read this and write this paper or do this experiment or whatever, and that's still a way for me to learn, but there's also other ways, like through experience, like through having great conversations, and like I wasn't able to do those things because I didn't have the time to focus on them, quite like you didn't have the time to focus on that stuff when you were a top level athlete, and like that's just what comes with it. Like, you can't expect to be this high performer and then like kind of half-ass it. Like, maybe I'm sure there are some people who like get by.
But even still, like, even those people, you don't see the behind the scenes. You don't even know what goes on in their head when they're a top performer. We see people who are like, you think an effort is half-assed, but like really like their mind is on it all the time.
Yeah.
There might not be like they're physically 100%, just like somebody else may feel like they need to be, but like their mind is on it 100% of the time in all their decisions. So it's like really crazy to think about that. But the loss of identity thing is really real. And it's a really big struggle for a lot of athletes or anybody who has that, it happens in like military too, or where there's like that strong sense of community and like reinforced identity. And I think, having that seasonal plasticity, to give a fancy term to like the being adaptable, seasonal plasticity. I like that a lot. But there's different seasons in your life, and like, not that you erase, what is done in the previous season, but you have to learn how to transfer that. You have to learn how to reflect on that and bring the components of it that help build you up into that new season of your life. Because a lot of times we just feel like, okay, I'm not that anymore, so I have to totally dedicate my life and existence to something else. But what is that? Well, if you leave everything else behind, you're really not going to have any clues as to like what you should be doing next. And a lot of times people will just abandon one identity, or the identity abandons them, and then they're like, oh, well, I don't know what to do. Well, you have to just keep moving, to be honest. You have to like stay invested in your life and mind your own business, so to speak. Literally invest your mind in what you have going on in order to figure out what comes next. And I think that's where a lot of people struggle with that. That's certainly where I did. And I was just like, I'm not the one to stay dormant too long, and so I was just like doing too much stuff, and I'm like, okay, what about this? What about this? What about this? What about this? And I'm like, all right, just chill for a moment. What is really piquing your interest? Where do you feel pulled towards? And like, you can kind of let it develop from there. But a lot of people have that resistance to change, and they think that, once one season is over, that everything is over, and they get that real deep despair. And I've had those moments too, but it's like, man, you just gotta keep moving with it.
Yeah, that, and I also think that for anybody who's been a high level athlete in any capacity, right, or just dedicated so much time, like you said, like military or really any kind of first responder, right? Like, you've dedicated so much time to one thing. I think that it can be really hard for people in that situation to be like multifaceted, right? Because you have to dedicate all of your time to this, right? Whether it's
and
physical or mental.
is built around that.
Like, Because why wouldn't it be, right?
Right.
Like they need to understand it, they need to support it, they need to be there for you, and vice versa. So like if everybody in your life is doing this one thing, thinking this one way, and you have to have laser focus physically and mentally on one thing, it's really hard to become this like well-rounded individual, right? So I think that a lot of people, when they do get out and they maybe have this loss of identity, you know, oh, I'm not a gymnast anymore. Well, now I have to go balls into like one other thing, and it's like, wait, why can't we just do like a few other like why can't I just spread out and be more multifaceted? And like, because you never really had the opportunity to do that when you were being at such a high level for one thing. And it's that kind of that mindset of like, okay, do I want to do one thing and be known for that one thing and do that 100% well, and then everything else kind of falls apart? Or do I want to be like pretty good in a few areas? And I'm the type of person that's like, I would rather be pretty good in a few areas and like be happy with that, you know, because anytime you look at somebody who seems like they have it all in one area, there's 5 other areas of life that are failing. I've never met somebody who is
That's such a good word, just from a sermon that I was listening to, and it was like the pastor was saying you can't like crop and copy. You know what I mean? People want the outcome and they want to copy what someone else is doing, but they're only like cropping that image of what is really going on. You can't do that. You can't have it all without having it all. You know what I mean? So like he was likening it to someone who had, you know, like 15 Grammys but had 5 failed marriages, and he's like, well, I would love to have a Grammy, but like I don't want to have more than one wife. You know what I'm saying? And so it's like when people get trapped up in looking at what someone else is doing, they lose sight of what they're able to do in their own life. And that may be that person is really good at that one thing, but maybe you're meant to be good at multiple things, and that's all right.
Yeah. Or if you want to be really good at that one thing, you have to accept the costs that are going to come with it.
Yeah.
And if you want to be that ultra successful business person or athlete, you have to understand that you're probably going to have strained relationships, right? You're going to have issues with like balancing your emotions, and you're gonna have to skip out on a lot of other things. And if that's what you want, then that's fine. But you can't say, I want this and that. Because I've never met somebody who's so like laser focused successful in one area who has everything else together. Like if they probably paint it like they do on fucking social media, but they don't. Like I've met these people, you've met these people, and you're like, yo, your shit's falling apart. Like you had this going on, but like, what the fuck?
Like, wow, okay, cool.
Like you're trying to shut the door on all your bullshit, but it is like seeping out.
Yeah, it's like pushing the door pretty heavily. It's winning almost.
And at some point, it's gonna come out, and that's why we always hear those stories of like the celebrities and the artists and like all those top people. And it's like, oh my God, they have all these skeletons. Yeah, no fucking shit. Like, you can't become that person without creating those, right? Because you're not addressing this other stuff in your life. And unless you have the most supportive partner who's going to understand that. Like, I don't care how supportive somebody is. Like, they're going to get tired of that shit.
Yeah, no doubt.
Listen, like, come on. Like, we got to work on something. Like,
something's got to give.
Yeah,
something's got to give eventually. That's 100% facts.
So I think that's a really hard thing, I think, for athletes too, or just anybody who's been really successful in one area. It's like, okay, becoming multifaceted and not just diving 100% into one other thing and saying, okay, I do want to expand out because I have this time now, because, you know, you didn't have that time before. And like you said, these 5 years, like imagine if you were in your friend's like shoes who just hung it up now, and you're like, oh my God, fuck. Like, like think about.
That's nothing against them. That's just like in my own process.
You,
like, where would I have been if I had made that decision? And
if I had just kept pushing, like I maybe would have had these accolades, but again, at what cost? And what else wouldn't have been developed in my life? Yeah,
and you know, we're not trying in any way or shape or form to shit on persistence, because like obviously persistence in any, you know, capacity when applied properly can produce amazing results. However, there's also time where you have to really reflect. Like you can't be like blindly persistent. I mean you can. I just feel like that's a terrible way to go about things. Like if you truly don't have a vision set and you're trying to just have this bulldog persistence, but you don't have any determination as far as like where you're trying to go.
Direction.
Yeah. Like you're really just, I don't know, digging yourself into a well that like has no end. Like so for me, when I left sport, I think that was like the biggest jumping off point, was where I had stopped imagining that path for myself and started imagining the possibilities outside of it, and like there was just so much more reward in that than there was within the current track of things. And it's painful. You leave a community, you leave a community, so to speak. Those connections are still there, they don't go away, but you're not necessarily in all the way the same anymore. So like there's going to be that pain of change and finding yourself, but I really feel like it's so much more beneficial when you can make that decision in peace to understand like, yo, I have so much growth potential. And like even that would be an entirely different conversation of like having that growth mindset. But like even that, I'm like, how are we not all on that same wave of understanding that like just because you're not doing it now don't mean you can't do it later. You know, you can grow into this with the proper perspective. But
some people just don't want that. Yeah. And something that I'm really guilty of is thinking like, okay, I want to learn about all this stuff and I want to improve here. Like, why doesn't everybody else, right? So I try to share stuff, and you're like, okay, let's share this and let's talk about this and like let's see if somebody like picks up on it, and they're just kind of like, okay,
right,
you know, right. You're like, you're almost like taken aback, like, what, you don't want these gifts, you don't want this stuff, like, why don't you want
knowledge bomb I just dropped on you? Your mind's not blowing right now. This is
but
crazy.
Then there's other things that people talk about that like I have zero interest in, so then I'm kind of like, wait, that might be where they're at there, right. You know, and it's like, okay, but I'm like, you don't even find this sort of, I could not care about something, but if somebody's excited about it and like wants to tell me, I'm like, just tell me more. Like,
enthusiasm goes a long way.
I want to learn about it.
Yep.
But yeah, some people are just not there, and they are just very comfortable living a certain way, and at the same, you know, I'm like, okay, I guess I can't.
They say that, yeah, but I don't really think they believe it deep down. I think that they're comfortable with the level of discomfort they've created for themselves in those scenarios where it's like you're so resistant to learning and change that like you are now, you've created an identity of somebody who's in that position, and you're like, I'm cool where I'm at, but in the back of your mind you're like, something's got to change. And what has to change is the mindset that you're holding yourself in.
Or you've suppressed that so much, and you're using outside like substances or distractions or whatever to kind of just like keep that at bay, because you maybe thought that at some point, but you're now there. I mean, think of how many distractions there are in our world that like you can just legitimately numb everything out.
You can just pick your phone up and then like literally that'd be it. You stay there for hours, you know?
There's an endless amount of like things to entertain you and just be mindless and just let you cope in a really negative way. But there's so many, like, I think a lot of it is like people have pushed that down so far, and they think that they're so far removed from it that they're like, well, I see this person and there's no way I could do that. And if you look at like goal setting literature, that's actually true too. Like if you look at a goal, if you try to set a goal that's like so outside of your like even realm of possibility, people are like, fuck, I'm not gonna fucking do that. You know, like, so you have to be still realistic with like your goal setting, right? Like you can't be living paycheck to paycheck and be like, I'd really like to be Elon Musk, but because I'm not, fuck it, just gonna stay here, right? Like obviously that's not even realistic, but I think people have just convinced themselves, to your point, like they've convinced themselves that like that is their identity and they're nothing more, and they just kind of suppress it and they mask it with these other things and these distractions and these coping mechanisms that are just poor coping mechanisms.
And again, I have to say that it's been something that I've taken for granted. You know, you grow up and they're always like, education is key, and I think it is really just the understanding of like what I used to take for granted was like having graduated from college. Like how can I have ever taken that for granted? But understanding that I've been in a system long enough to like promote my understanding of like the value of education, where a lot of people never even get to fully realize the value that education brings to their life. Not necessarily the information that they've learned, but like
just education
itself. And I think, I mean, even personally, like I feel like one of the greatest things about school, one of the things that school is intended mainly to teach you is not just the information, but it's intended to teach you how to learn something, right? And we always think about like school as being, you know, I'm learning this geometry, I ain't never gonna use it. Okay, but like how are they going about teaching you how to do it? Because that's the process, that's the system that's actually going to be more applicable. But like if you never learn how to learn, which a lot of people don't, I see why there's that blockage to having that growth mindset, because they're like, I just don't have it. Never have, never will. But it's like, it's not necessarily the truth, but that's the truth they've accepted for themselves. So like, I've continued to learn to give grace in that regard. And by no means am I perfect. By no means am I even close to where I see my full growth potential. However, I enjoy that process of learning. And I always enjoy conversations like this because I pick up on insights and speaking to people of like mind or that have a deeper understanding on a broader subject. And I'm like, dang, so much more that I still have to learn. And it's exciting to me because I'm like, wow, there's a lot of stuff that I can still invest my mind into. And big portion of my philosophy is like, if you're not actively the times when I've been at my lowest in my life have been when I have not been actively invested in, I say actively invested in any growth in my life, whether that's reading a book or developing a hobby or a skill. It is always, the low points have always been when I haven't had anything to invest my mind into in a growth perspective. Everything just feels like blah. But really, it only feels like blah because I haven't put myself into that growth. Yeah, exactly.
And that's why I will always fight for and stand behind education. Obviously, there was a lot of issues with the current education system, like that. I mean, we could go off. Yeah. That would be a whole own separate topic, and there is much that needs to be corrected. But to your point, school should be about learning how to think. And to be fair, that can't be. I think we can certainly change like younger education, right? But only to so much, because again, like if you're a tiny, like a small kid, like there's only so much that you can't be like, okay, so here's consciousness. Like,
let me break this down for you.
You might be able to introduce
existential to a 6-year-old.
Like, there's definitely concepts that we can like work in better. But I do think that, as much as people say like college is a waste of money unless you're going to be a doctor or a lawyer, and I get where they're saying that because there are certainly degrees that some people could see as a waste of money, right? Or whatever, right? And that's 4 years, you could be developing certain skills. But if you're doing college right, you are learning those skills in that period as well. Like I think it's people who are just trying to get by, trying to pass their test and like just going and partying or going and fucking off in whatever way that they want. Like, and trust me, I had my party years, like but I got
Big Ten schools. Let's go.
Yeah, but I got all my shit done. I did my research. I got up at 6 a.m. to be at the lab. Like, what I'm saying? Like I was still doing all of that and having a lot of fun. Right. But I think that when people are they're not utilizing the system in the best way possible, right? They're just kind of getting by, and you're like, okay, well, no wonder you didn't take anything away from this,
right?
And I think back now, and I'm like, man, I really wish I could go back and take those same classes because I feel like I would learn so much more now. But then I'm also 100%. But I needed to get through it in that way to learn what didn't work, and I wouldn't have been able to get here if I didn't have
it all weaves into like the moment, and you're like, dang, I wish I could say it now because I knew it now, but I didn't. I wouldn't have known it then.
I wouldn't have.
I really think college is more set up for, if someone's like 25 when they entered it as like a freshman, if there's like a gap between 18 and 25, you couldn't go to college. I feel like, you retain whatever financial aid you could get or your scholarship from that age period, like you'd be so much better academically because you'd be like, I need this. I can see how I can.
But then
apply
also,
this.
like, what are we gonna do in those other times, right? Like, I don't know if I have a good answer there either.
Exactly, because you might not end up going back,
Oh, but that's definitely the hardest.
And I feel like there's certainly, like, I got a bachelor's in psychology, right? And someone could certainly be like, oh yeah, if you pay for school and financial aid to put you in debt, well, that would just be a waste. Well, here's the thing: it's no waste unless you misuse it, right? Like it's not a waste; it's a misuse. Like that's all it is. Because there are people who are mad successful without any like extensive formal education. There are people who are desolate who have mad extensive formal education. So it's like it's a misuse of things, not necessarily a waste of that particular time investment, resource investment, whatever, but it's about how you imagine yourself to be. Like how do you use that time? How do you use that experience? What did you gain that you can use? What are you holding on to that you shouldn't be using? You know what I mean? And like that's a really big piece, and that's something that has come into my perspective very recently, is the understanding between like the waste of something versus the misuse of something. And having that understanding has been like a really big paradigm shift for me, because I'm like, dang, like even if you break it down to like, people be like time wasters. Well, it's not like time isn't just wasted.
And this is such a stupid example, but the real, where
yeah, exactly. And I, like in my mind was the same thing. Like I was saying the same thing to myself. I was like, well, I didn't waste this time. I may have misallocated the best use of it, but like honestly, I derived some value from it because I knew what didn't work. And so I'm like, was it even a misuse of time if I really gained value from it? It's like, no. And was it wasted? No. But it's that perspective and that story of how you tell yourself about the experience, and it's like major key. That's been, that was a little bit of time.
All right,
that I had to learn from. Another one.
Like on that note.
Right.
No, but on that note, I think that was a really great place to end. This was a really great discussion. I hope you guys took a lot out of it. I know I did, and it's just always fun. Like to your point, like I love just having different conversations with people, and like just, I don't know, just diving into different topics. And like I'm just such a person who enjoys learning for the sake of learning, no matter what topic it is, and just having these random thoughts.
No doubt.
Normally
conversation flow as well.
Normally they're just in my head, so this is nice to get.
Right. Oh man, someone can relate to that. Perfect.
Yes,
I was going crazy in here.
But for people to find you, if they listen to this and they're like, they don't think you're crazy.
Yeah.
If they liked what they heard.
If you don't think I'm crazy, then you need to re-listen to it and reaffirm that for yourself. But if you want to find me, all my social channels are at Stacey Ervin Jr. My name, Stacey. There's an E in there, yes. Ervin, Ervin, Jr., Jr. Pretty much same across all platforms. Super easy to find, and
Awesome.
Right away with me.
Yeah. Thank you for coming on. If you like this week's episode, please share it. This is the best way you can support our show. To check out our coaching services, courses we offer, and additional content we put out, visit teamlocofit.com and follow us on Instagram at teamlocofit.